and good afternoon. I'm glad to be here and talking about one of my favorite topics. Just by way of introduction, I'm an aquatic ecologist, and I've been working in that field for, I guess, since 1978, when I first started with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I've been in Belize since 1988. And during most of that time, I've worked in one capacity or another with aquatic issues. Currently, I'm involved in helping to develop a management plan for New River Watershed, and I've been involved in several other different kinds of jobs like that around Belize, off and on throughout the years. So I'll jump right into my presentation. Try to get it going here. All right. Here we go. Okay, my topic is water is life, a very simple and agreeable message. I think everybody can relate to that. Those who don't really appreciate water, just simply go without water for about a day, and you'll have a new appreciation for water. Clean water, of course, is everybody's concern, particularly today when we're challenged by many kinds of issues. But to maintain life, the bottom line is we have to take care of our water. Good quality water, of course, is a basic requirement of life, as I said. We use it for drinking, agriculture, household use, industries, recreation. But even more importantly, water is vital to maintain our ecosystems that provide us with such critical ecological services, without which we can't exist. So it's in our best collective interest to care for our water. Just to start out, I want to give a quick appreciation for the complexity of the hydrologic cycle, that is the circulation of water on Earth. And of course, this is essential for determining the climate and weather patterns that we have, for growing crops, keeping rivers flowing, defining our ecosystems, and allowing life to continue. In this busy diagram here, you can see several different colors. The light blue represents water in the atmosphere, the rainfall that comes to the surface of the earth. The brown is the subsurface waters, the aquifers and groundwaters. And the green in the middle is the surface of the land. And that's essentially the watersheds. The gray water is the estuaries, that water that's a mixture of fresh and marine waters. And the dark blue are the oceans. And of course, the waters continually cycle through the systems of the earth based on this general pattern here, driven by the gravity of Earth and by the
Ed,
oh, I'm not sharing.
Yeah, you're not sharing screen.
Okay, how do I do that?
Down at the bottom of your screen, there's a little green thing that says screen share.
So I'll just kind of get busy with where I was. So anyway, here's the diagram. Let me see if I can. Is everyone seeing that well?
Yes.
Okay. My screen is cluttered with things, so I assume that yours is seeing the actual image, hopefully. So anyway, this is the complicated hydrologic cycle that that water moves across the earth with. And on the side here, the sidebar, I've listed a variety of different key components to this, from clouds to oceans, but it's the forests, soils, streams, rivers, lakes, lagoons, wetlands, aquifers, and estuaries that are the watershed. That makes up essentially the terrestrial portion of the hydrologic cycle, which is the portion where we live and unfortunately pollute. And so there's where most of the real issues are, even though we're able to influence these other areas now with our advanced technologies. So the key to watersheds functioning are healthy forests. The forests are vital in that they capture rainfall and soil water and evaporate and transpire that water back into the atmosphere to rain again and again. So what the forests do is to keep water on the landscape longer. Without the forest continually doing that, the water would simply run off back out into the ocean again. And history has taught us many times when the forests are gone, droughts follow. And so since I've been in Belize, for example, I think we've lost about 25% of our forest cover over the past 32 years or so, just to give an idea of how rapid that is going on. How much of this forest will be lost before we really, as a society, understand the importance of forest in preserving and providing our water? That's the real question. So the riparian forests are a very important type of forests. They're one of the most important forests in the landscape, I would say. They're the filter system of the landscape. They help protect the streams and rivers from pollutants. Anything washing from the lands into the rivers and streams by way of surface flow has to go through a riparian forest of some kind if that forest is still intact, which in many places of Belize, we're losing riparian forest rapidly. Besides that, they're fortifying the stream banks, and they're shading the water, which is actually providing a variety of habitat choices for things living there. And they're feeding the streams and rivers with leaves and fruits, flowers, and wood, all those things that are the base of the flowing water system. The wetlands are also very, very important because they recharge aquifers. They also absorb floodwaters, and they cycle nutrients and provide refuge for wildlife. And they're also very important in sequestering carbon, and they do many other services as well. We're also losing our wetlands very, very rapidly. A lot of the wetlands we lose routinely are the small wetlands, but they add up collectively to a very important part of the ecosystem. Some of the larger wetlands we have, such as Crooked Tree wetland system, is under protection, but many of our wetlands are not under protection, and those are the ones that are going by the wayside. So riparian forests and wetlands are some of the most critical components that we must contend with if we're really serious about protecting our water resources. And of course, there are the aquatic plants, particularly in wetlands and slow-moving rivers and lagoons. And the aquatic plants are essentially freshwater pastures that provide a lot of food and shelter for fish and other wildlife. They're also very critical, particularly those emerged aquatic plants, in being able to provide oxygen to the sediments and improve the quality of life for organisms in these aquatic bodies, which improves the availability of food resources to fishes and then ultimately to people who use those fish resources. They're also very important in reducing riverbed and riverbank erosion, and they help clean the water. So aquatic plants and all the components associated with aquatic plants, including the biofilms that grow in their leaves, are very important in cleaning water. So another critical element of this whole hydrologic cycle. So New River is essentially a wake-up call. We've seen this in the news. Please excuse my dog. We've seen this in the news many times. In 2019, it was the most severe. We had an incredible drought, and some of the images you see here are the organic films that built up on the surface of the water. That's a lot of oils and waxes and other components that are released from degrading organic matter. And you see the New River in a very green state where there's a lot of phytoplankton bloom and die-offs, which again stress the oxygen level in the water. So the oxygen level is stressed because of so many nutrients that are going into the New River. And many of those nutrients are nutrients that the towns and cities are pumping in, not just the industries, but the industries are also contributing. But what's happening in New River is actually happening all around Belize. And it's sewage, solid waste, those things that we're pumping into the river ourselves. And sewage, of course, is pumping a lot of nitrogen, pathogens, and hormones into the water system. And here you see a photograph of a sewage plume coming out of a drainage canal right into New River. And this is raw sewage that flows into the river 24/7, 365 days of the year. No one has addressed this issue, and it's still ongoing. The Department of the Environment, of course, has plans to fix this issue somehow, but again, it's an expensive undertaking to do. Sewage is a problem. And of course, many of the people among us are also using the rivers as a garbage dump. The rivers and riparian forests. The recent work we've done on the New River before, we've discovered several garbage dumps along the way that are just within eyeball of the probably the culprits that were dumping the garbage. But this is not just an Orange Walk issue. It's not just a New River issue. As I say, it's happening everywhere. Walk down a street in anywhere in Belize, and if you can smell sewage, you know there's leaking sewage going into the receiving waters, wherever those may be. We don't have to sacrifice ranching, cattle production, livestock production to have healthy rivers. But a lot of times farmers do just that. They clear the riverbanks to allow their cows, livestock having access to the river. And oftentimes they clear extensive areas of the river, which of course open up those banks to erosion. You see some of the erosion happening in the top right corner and the bottom left corner. The bottom left, you can see where livestock are trampling the edge of the river. And of course, livestock are also loading the river with nutrients, adding to the issues. There are many solutions to finding water for livestock, so we don't have to go the old route of clearing the riverbanks. And it's not a choice between having water and having agriculture. As a matter of fact, without water, there is no agriculture. And agriculture is really the management of water and soil to grow select plants. And the future farmers depend on the current farmers making the right choices now to ensure that they're going to have farming capacities in the future. You can see this Google Earth image of a section of the Belize River, encompassing Spanish Lookout, which is large-scale agriculture. And you can see that the farmers are going right up to the edge of the river. And if you drill down into the image, you'll see a lot of footprints of wetlands that used to be there. The ground is still moist, but it's been stripped of wetland vegetation. And even though it grows no crops, it's still cleared so that the tractor doesn't have to turn and keep plowing in a straight direction. But you can see the extensive damage that's been done within the riparian forest, which is really unnecessary. The riparian areas are a poor choice for agriculture because there's a lot of stressors that will take away the agriculture that's been placed there. So farmers are really water managers, and they have to, whether they know it or not, but the The farmers that really know that are the farmers that are farming for the future. They're the ones that are going to pass along a productive landscape to the next generation. And you can see some of the issues here on the top left image is North Stand Creek. You can see where the citrus grower has cleared right up to the very edge of the river. And you can see citrus trees that are just about ready to fall into the water. There's already been a lot of land loss as that river begins to cut into this now devegetated bank. And consequently, the farmer will be fighting that for the rest of their time on earth. And it'll be something that their children, if they inherit the property, will have to continue to deal with. It's expensive to fix a mistake like that, where agriculture goes right up to the outside edge of a bend on a cliff bank, on a steep bank. That's a very expensive endeavor to undertake to fix. And you can see a couple of more examples. The one at the bottom left is a milpa, and that actually is on the Baboon River. That bank used to be another 15 feet out from where it is right now before the milpa was placed. On the bottom right, you see part of Dry Creek, and you can see how much loss there's been. One side of the river is fully forested, the other side has been cleared right up to the edge, and you can see how much loss there's been of this steep bank within the bend of the river, and it's threatening the road that's there. So again, an issue that the farmer will continually have to struggle with. So farmers are also beginning to reach into the rivers for irrigation waters. There's a limit to how much water we can actually withdraw from the river, and the river still maintain its ecological functions. And that determination has not been made yet for the rivers of Belize. That's the kind of studies that we need to have implemented very soon here, especially since more farmers are looking at irrigation as a way to deal with uncertainties in weather patterns. But if you're irrigated, you need good quality water. If you try to pass heavily sediment loaded water through an irrigation system, then you've got to tear down and clean out your irrigation system quite frequently. So good quality water is of benefit to the farmer as well. And of course, if you have access to drones, or if you're able to get in the air with a light plane and photograph the landscape, that's when you can really see where the wetlands used to be. And here's a couple of examples. The top right is a small wetland in the middle of a field. And even though the wetland vegetation has been completely eradicated to make room for the crops, there's not any production going to be coming out of that particular piece of the field, because the soils are still saturated. In this case, you can still see the water above the surface of the soil. So the crops that we grow are not going to grow well on those types of soils. The bottom photograph, you see an oxbow lake, and it's been completely denuded of its surrounding vegetation. And the one end of it is actually a wetland that apparently dries up during the dry period, and is a surface water body during the wet season, but now it's also stripped of its vegetation cover, and therefore it's not doing what the wetlands normally do. It's not as productive. It's not as efficient at holding floodwaters and slowing down floodwaters as it used to be, and it's probably contributing a lot of pollutants to the river now. So water resources of the next generation of farmers are being lost, and that's what we have to really think about if we really are wanting to be sustainable as a society. And of course, there's also a lot of loss of riparian forests and consequently water quality. from urbanization, development, and industries of all kinds. This top illustration here is a site on the New River Lagoon, and it's one that's not permitted. You can see it's an extensive project. Apparently, they have filled the wetland and stripped away the riparian forests. And you can see right on top is a pickup truck and about 4 or 5 people standing off to the side. And that gives you an idea of the scale of this project. And I can't estimate the number of dump truck loads of fill that's been brought into this site. This was done without a permit, without anyone really knowing about it from the DOE or forestry or other places, because it was done in a part of Belize where no one was really paying attention. And I assume it must be the development of a potential tourist site. We were back at this area. This was taken about a year and a half ago. We were back there last week. And much of this area has settled. It's settled down. It's much lower now because the wetlands themselves are often layers and layers and layers of peat beneath the layers of sediment. And that peat, when you put pressure on it, begins to compress. And that's why we have, in places in Belize City, we have concrete houses that are tilted on their sides because they were built on mangrove wetlands. And in the case of mangroves, some of those layers of peat are about 15 meters deep. So there's a lot of peat buildup there, but that represents sequestered carbon. So on the bottom photo here, you see an example in Belize City, where the wetland on the left has been converted into the project on the right, and a drainage ditch that now shunts this water that used to be held in the wetland to the river to get it away from the landscape, because most people think you have to drain the land to have usable land. And this, again, is one of those projects that was conducted without permits and without real knowledge among those who should know. A rich developer who was able to move forward with the game plan without having to go through the red tape. And so all that area behind the fence is, again, part of the wetland that has been filled for some type of business venture. So in Belize, we're fortunate to have all the tools we need to measure the decline of our water resources. We can also measure the improvement of our water resources, but unfortunately, we don't measure that very often. We're usually measuring the decline. I recently conducted an extensive survey of the types of water quality labs we have throughout the country, and I was very surprised at the quality of equipment that we have available. We can do a lot of the types of tests that we used to have to send out of the country to have done. So we do have the expertise as well to manage all this equipment and to process samples. We also have incredible laws. We have plenty of laws to protect our water resources. But the problem is the laws are often not applied. There's a serious lack of political will. And that's an issue that's brought up in most of the meetings I attend where we discuss conservation issues. So without political will, that only leaves community action. That's the only thing that we have available that we can move forward with to protect our critical water resources. So what kind of actions are we really talking about? What should communities be doing? Well, number one is communicating. Communicating with farmers, with developers, neighbors, politicians, investors, our youth, and many others. We should be communicating with everyone that will listen, because this is a common resource. This is an issue that we should all be concerned about. We should have education outreach, the community themselves. What better format than at community meetings to actually engage people in and learning about and thinking about the importance of our aquatic systems that sustain us, our neighborhood ecosystems that are important as part of that assortment of critical landscape elements that keep water moving and keep water working for us. We also should be planting trees wherever needed. And there's many places around the country where we need to have trees put back in place, where trees have been removed and those trees are needed there for the functions they provide. And we should always, every opportunity, be involving our youth in all that we do to help protect our water resources and to build back the natural elements that have been stripped from the landscape. But very importantly, we need to be protecting and in managing our local natural resources ourselves. Those systems that help provide our water. We as a community need to be doing that. Government can only do so much. NGOs can only do so much, but the people themselves have to be involved. Without the involvement of people, conservation just does not happen. But the good news is, this is already happening. People are already stepping up. People are already taking charge of the natural ecosystems within their neighborhoods. Many of these communities are people who have grown up with these natural resources their whole lives, and they've watched these natural resources begin to deteriorate, and they become concerned enough that they organize and they eventually get involved, and they oftentimes become co-managers of the protected areas around their neighborhoods. So that's something that's happening all over Belize. And here's a few examples. These are examples of the community-based organizations and NGOs working to protect these natural resources, including those that are under protected status. Even those under protected status, if not watched carefully, will degrade and can disappear. So these are the ones that I've worked with over the past few years. Crooked Tree Village, the Belize Audubon Society, and the National Biodiversity Office are working together to protect and conserve the Crooked Tree Wildlife Sanctuary, which is actually all the wetlands that surround the central island where Crooked Tree Village is located. And this, of course, is a very old sanctuary. It's been there for many, many years, and it's extremely important for migratory birds. This is an incredible place to visit during the period of the migratory birds when they land for refueling and resting. And some of them actually are using this for reproducing. Here is the Community Baboon Sanctuary Women's Conservation Group. And this is actually a lot of private lands that are being managed on the lower reaches of the Belize River. And this again is an institution that's been here probably for about 30 years. I was just privileged to help update their management plan a few months ago, and they're very ambitious about moving forward. They've been hit pretty hard by the COVID crisis and the lack of tourism that they were depending on in the past, but that sparked them to think of new ways of helping to support their initiative. One of the main problems here in this particular conservation effort is that the lands have been put aside voluntarily by the landowners who agree to leave the riparian forest because that's where the howler monkeys live. Unfortunately, when many of these early landholders eventually die and their land gets passed along, the next generation may not be as aware of the importance, or they may sell the land. And those that buy the land, oftentimes foreigners moving into Belize, are completely unaware of the agreements and continue to clear the riverbank right down to the edge. So we're seeing, even within this private landscape of conservation, we're seeing riparian forests beginning to disappear. So that means that a lot of communication has to go on, a lot of outreach has to happen, and people have to come together and discuss these issues and get on the common page for this very important common resource. The Friends of Conservation and Development. I knew these guys when they first started out as a handful of teenagers who were concerned about the natural areas around their neighborhoods. And now over the course of time, they've developed into a internationally recognized NGO that is actually engaged in a series of very important jobs, not just conservation, but also helping to protect the borders from Guatemalans that are invading into the Chicobol and clearing land. So the FCD has been companion with the Forest Department and now the National Biodiversity Office for the protection and conservation of the Chicobol forests. And now they're involved in other places within the Mayan Mountains. It's a big job, and it's a small handful of people who are involved in this effort. Fortunately, they do have a lot of assistance from the Police Defense Force and funding agencies, but it's still a struggle to maintain some kind of management presence in such a vast area. So they're getting drones and they're getting other kinds of equipment to help them scale up. There's another one, the Southeastern Watershed Alliance Group, which started at Steadfast Community. And they were initially focused on Billy Buccaneer National Park, because Billy Buccaneer is the water source for 3 of the villages along this stretch of the Hummingbird Highway. But now they've expanded their vision to include North Stand Creek Watershed. And of course, they're working closely with InBio and eventually with the Forest Department and others as they grapple with figuring out a way to manage a watershed collectively among all the villages throughout the watershed. And that's a daunting challenge. Takes me back to the days of the Baboon River watershed, the Baboon Watershed Association, and the management of the Baboon River watershed among 11 different communities. When that was first set up, it was the first organization of its kind, and it was supported by the newly appointed Chief Environmental Officer, Dr. Victor Gonzalez, because as he would remind people, everyone out there are the eyes and ears of the Department of the Environment. Without those people reporting things, there's no way they would know what was going on in those days. The Baboon Watershed Association struggled to maintain and had its heyday. It was funded in the beginning. It struggled to maintain when the funding began to dwindle, which is the problem with many of these NGOs, having consistency and being able to finance their existence long-term. And that's what a lot of the funding agencies are realizing. We need to fund these organizations for 15 and 20 years, not for 3 years. And those organizations can then focus on the job they're they're doing rather than scrambling for more money. In the days of the Baboon Watershed Association, we had an office in Belmont. We had radio communication with all the villages. We had all of these different expenses that are not necessary today. Everyone in the watershed almost has a cell phone in their pocket that allows them to communicate, to photograph, to document, to identify the location of anything they see out there. And a good laptop can actually replace the need for a hard office. But what we do need to do is to continually make ourselves present in Belmont Pond, visit with the government agencies that are critical assets in helping to back up the communities that are trying to manage their natural resources. And of course, here is the Friends of New River and a youth group called Echo Heart that's just beginning to find their footing. I've already had an interaction with them, and I hope to have many more. It's a promising young group of very dedicated youths who are seriously interested in the future and doing what they can now to reverse the trends they're seeing. And of course, New River is the national alarm system that's sounded, and it has sparked the development of a level of awareness that we haven't had before. So New River, again, it's going through some, it's coming out of, I guess, a eutrophication trend this year. It didn't go into a full eutrophic condition as it did in 2019. But again, we're in an age of climate change, and we can expect more situations where there's going to be drought, intense heat, and challenges with dissolved oxygen that affects all the organisms living in the water. So we can see repeats of this, and we know what we need to do. We need to reduce the nitrogen that's in the system, and that's going to require the support of local government, the support of community members. Everyone who has a septic tank in their backyard needs to make sure that septic tank is functioning, for example. So there's a lot of work to do, and we have to have full support of the communities to really achieve those kinds of things. Here's a very interesting one. HITA, the Hummingbird Environmental Tour Guide Association. I'm currently involved with them as they're working to upgrade the park. They got a UNDP GEF small grant to help upgrade the park, and now they're going to be petitioning for the next grant to help train and equip a group of park rangers. So there's going to be presence on the ground. And of course, they're working with the National Biodiversity Office and the Forest Department to manage Five Blues Lake National Park. And they want to use it. This is a tour guide group. They want to use it as a destination for their clients. And they all grew up in this area. They all know this park from the time they were kids. And they are really wanting to see this park taken care of. Just to give you an example of some of the issues, when COVID-19 first hit and the first lockdown occurred in 2019, or was it 2020? When the first lockdown happened, the park was raided by hunters and loggers. And there's not a mahogany tree of any size left in the park. And much of the wildlife has disappeared. So there's going to be a lot of work to bring the park back to what it once was, but it can still get there. It's still a very productive and intact park system. And so now with the with the diligent work of HITA as co-managers, they have great visions for the park. Another group, CORE, that is located in San Ignacio, Santa Elena area, and their focus is the McCall River. The McCall River was also going through several changes during the 2019 drought that alarmed many of the residents there, and they began to meet, talk among themselves, and decided they needed to organize. They needed to become more involved in taking care of their watershed. And so this is, again, is one of those new groups coming online. And I have some interaction with them, and I hope to have a lot more as they begin to figure out how they're going to address the conservation issues for their local watershed. And this is another organization that I've just had a chance to meet, and they've invited me to be a board member. And this is the let's see, my screen is hiding it's so new I forget the name, but it's the Karst Conservation. I can't remember the name, and I can't see it because my screen is hidden by.
You have Belize Karst Habitat Conservation. Ed, you muted yourself, so unmute. Yeah, Ed, you muted yourself, so you need to unmute.
Okay, I'm back online. So this organization is another tour guide organization, and Tapir Mountain Nature Reserve was one of those parcels of land that government really couldn't take care of. It was in the hands of the Belize Audubon Society for a while, but quite frankly, the Belize Audubon Society has its hands full. It's managing about 8 or so protected areas around Belize. And this one is actually, Tapir Mountain Nature Reserve is set up for education and research. And without any management presence there, it was a hunting ground for many people around the area. And so now this organization has stepped up, and they are beginning to, they've already got a management plan, and they're beginning to build their forces to actually take on the serious mission of managing this property. One of the things they're doing is also promoting research. And research is really specialized tourism. Research and education tourism actually are very strong elements of the tourist industry, oftentimes more consistent than many other elements of the tourist industry. And this is something that is going to be coming back. Already we have university groups returning to Belize. We have researchers wanting to get back into the field, and they require everything tourists need and more. They need lab space, and they need research assistants, and they need access to what I call the local naturalists, which are the hunters and fishers that actually know what's going on the ground. And we need to give hunters and fishers something else to do besides just hunting and fishing, perhaps even helping them appreciate the value of what they have even more in the process. So let's see, I've frozen, my screen is frozen. Oh, here we go. So those are some of the ones that I've been working with lately, but those are certainly not the only ones. We have a lot of other programs in Belize that NGOs and CBOs that are stepping up to the plate to take care of business, including Tide, Yakshe, and Program for Belize, Satim, the Corozal Sustainable Future Initiative, Rancho Dolores Environmental and Development Company Limited, and the Mayflower Bacawina Environmental Development Group. These are all organized groups of what started out as CBOs. Now, many of them have grown into NGOs, which allow them more access to funding and other things to help support their initiative for taking care of their natural resources, of those forested areas that are so vital in the hydrological cycle. But that's not the only thing going on. There's other things happening. We're entering what the chief forest officer described to me as a decade of reforestation in Belize. We've gone beyond the days when our job was to preserve our natural resources. Now we have to recover our natural resources. So there's a lot of interesting things happening on the ground. A lot of international groups, for example, that are bringing heavy money to the table. And here's a list of some of them from the United Nations Development Program, GEF Small Grants program that has funded things for many years in this country. The World Wildlife Federation is also very active in Belize. They're actually supporting a reforestation project right now within the Mopan River. The IUCN, and also now the World Resource Institute is partnered with CATIE out of Costa Rica. CATIE is one of my very favorite institutions. It's a research and education institution focused in environmental management, but it blends a natural resource management and agriculture together. They actually teach agriculture, but they produce no waste in their huge campus that encompasses a dozen different agricultural centers. They actually produce products that are sold internationally, and they use no pesticide. And of course, they're in Costa Rica, which has more insect issues than Belize does. So if they can do it, we can do it. And they want to work with us. Part of their goal is to work with other countries throughout Central America to help spread the technology. And many of our administrators who are working within government or NGOs have gone through CATIE and picked up master's and even doctoral degrees. So they're teamed up with the World Resource Institution, and they're looking at a restoration project in the Monkey River Valley. The Marta R project is a project that was heavily focused on the Belize River. Now it's sharing some of its money resources with the New River to help develop restoration projects there, building back areas that have been deforested within the New River area. Red Plus is getting its protocol geared up to begin addressing issues here. Coca-Cola Company has also invested heavily in restoration of forest areas and support of forest initiatives. So we have a lot of international support that represents multiple millions of dollars of investment. And this is investment that's going to be played out over the next decade. And many of these organizations have identified areas they're going to invest. Others are still looking around to figure out where the best strategies for investment really are for conservation, long-term conservation. And of course, long-term conservation means community involvement. But there's another group, the international carbon investors. I was actually tracked down by a group of these investors not long ago, and they wanted to talk to me, get ideas, fill me in on what they were thinking, and basically to build collaboration with local people who are doing things on the ground. And they're interested in buying up large properties that are of significant ecological value, but that are also under threat of some kind. The type of properties that if someone doesn't step in and take up those properties, they will eventually be deforested. And a portion of the investment profits for the sale of the carbon components is to be returned to Belize to support management of the carbon investment on the ground. That means providing training and creating jobs for local people. The deal is fully managed properties fetch the highest profits in the market. So if you can offer properties to investors that can guarantee those forests are going to continue for decades to come, then that property brings the highest value. But at the same time, that brings the highest return to the country that is supporting this system. So what we're looking at here is really the development of a new industry, a conservation industry in Belize. We have a lot of very talented and trained people around the country who need jobs in the field. I was involved in helping to develop the 4-year natural resource management program, University of Belize. And I think by the time we graduated the first 3 classes, we had pretty much saturated the market for the jobs that were available. And many of our graduating students became teachers and went into other areas. But they still kept signing up for natural resource management program because it was something that they wanted to do. And so we have a lot of trained people in this country. And now we need to figure out where their jobs should be and how those jobs should be funded. So here are opportunities coming our way that we can utilize. We have to go in with eyes open. We have to make sure that these agreements are something we're going to fully benefit from. But the future looks pretty bright from where I'm standing. So the main message here, is that we, the people, have to take care of our water, all of us working together. And it's up to us to also ensure that others do the same. We have to occasionally tap on the shoulder of our neighbors and say, you don't really need to clear this riparian area. It's too important. We have to intervene. So I want to leave it with a few more points here. One of the things is, after many years, and I was involved from the beginning in the discussions and the meetings and the designing of a National Integrated Water Resource Act. That took years and years to actually pull and to finally get passed in December 2011. The bad news is we've got this act passed, but it's never been enacted. So it's sitting there waiting to become active, but it needs an office, it needs staff, it needs a lot of monetary development to actually get going. But it's a 66-page act, so it's a very detailed act that covers all of the general things that should be addressed in an Integrated Water Resource Act. And the specifics for those jobs have to be worked out once the act is really enacted. But now it's 2021, and here we are 10 years later, with the act still lying dormant. So I want to leave you with three questions to ponder. What year did government give away our water resources, including the rainfall? Gave away our water resources. What year did we get our water back? And right now, the next question is, who actually owns our water? I'll leave you with those questions. There is still hope. We still have a chance. We can still turn the corner. We can still recover. And the things we're talking about doing, restoring our landscape, putting back the forest, putting back the riparian forests, the wetlands, protecting the large tracts of forest that still occur, and doing this without stifling agriculture. As a matter of fact, we want to help improve agriculture. We want to help make agriculture more efficient for the farmer and less costly for the farmer. But all of these things we're planning on doing are all actually adaptation strategies for climate change. These are the exact kinds of things that we should be doing, because we are facing a very uncertain future. And the longer we drag our feet, the longer we postpone actually getting out there and doing something to make the future more probable, then the worse it's going to be. But right now, we have many opportunities, resources, and a very competent population of people. There are many Belizeans with the types of degrees that we need to see something like this through. And now is our time to act. Thank you. Be concerned. Many of the, even the bulk items that we bring in, such as flour that everyone uses, it's got glyphosate for sure, and we're eating that glyphosate. So anything that we bring in, we're bringing in whatever those countries allow for their export materials. And we also know that there's a different standard for what's exported versus what's internally used in many of these source countries as well. So yes, we should be. And we should also be cognizant of the idea that water itself is a commodity. And one of the things that Belize is being put under pressure to do is to export water. And if we export water at the level that we're being requested to consider, it would actually have a change on our landscape. So there's issues on both sides of that coin.
Okay, another question is there an easily accessible place where the public might see the results of testing, such as what you had on your last screen after the end page of your PowerPoint?
As far as public access to data?
Yes. Okay,
yes, actually, there's a growing number of data sources that are available for public use. The Department of the Environment has data that's available, and actually, the Department of the Environment is struggling to set up an archive for water quality data, because if we don't archive it properly, we lose it. There's a lot of researchers, there's a lot of NGOs, there's other groups that are beginning to collect serious water quality data with very, very high professional equipment after having been trained, and that's very important data. That's all public access data. And there needs to be a way of maintaining that data and making it available for those who can use it. But it's still in in progress. It hasn't really been, that system hasn't been developed yet, but there are data sets that are available for the general public. New River, for example, has several sets of data that you can actually see some of the changes over time now. The DOE is monitoring data every month right now, and they're developing the kind of background information we need to actually make predictions and change. But that information should be available as well to the general public, and the general public should know what the parameters mean. So that's an area we need to really work on.
Okay. Do the dams on the McCall, they causing
Do the
causing
dams,
dam on the McCall causing deterioration of water quality?
yes, they are. They are in a number of ways. Number one, the Chileo particularly is a huge lake system now, and it's a very unnatural body of water within that landscape. And as a lake system that was formed by inundating the forests, it has very anaerobic sediments because all that organic material is eating up the oxygen and creating anaerobic conditions that are the proper conditions for incorporating heavy metals into the food chain, such as mercury. That's where we get a lot of the mercury coming into our fish tissue, is from these anaerobic beds. The bacteria there use mercury as an electron acceptor, and that's how it gets incorporated as an organic compound. But also the dams change the way that rivers work. There's no longer that seasonal high flow, low flow flush that happens. And consequently, the Belize River itself is a regulated river. There's a lot of fine sediments that are building up in the lower reaches of the river that normally don't occur because those flushing, those high floods that normally roll through, except for more the really intense ones that top the dams, don't clean it out as frequently as they used to. And as the sediments build up, that causes the river to widen. So there's a lot of side effects. And of course, some people have noticed the change in water quality as reflected in the cyanobacteria growth that cause itching of the skin and things like that. So there's a lot of impacts that happen when we modify the river by building dams.
And that same person asked, is the water that is contained in the dam good for drinking without major transformation?
I would think it's probably better than it will be downstream because there are no upstream residents. The main fecal material going into that water would be wildlife rather than human fecal material. And I would think that it's overall better quality water for drinking.
Okay. How can Belize reach a balance with agriculture and the preservation of our watersheds?
Well, actually, the preservation of our watersheds is to the advantage of the farmer. We can develop the landscape as long as we follow the ecological rules. We understand the function of the different forest types and we work within this ecological matrix. We identify those areas where it's got these suitable soil types and other conditions for being agriculturally productive and focus on those areas. And we protect those areas such as wetlands and riparian forests and steep slope forests that are really not agricultural landscapes. They're either too much flooding potential, or the soils are too thin, or the soils are too wet to really produce. And those kinds of things are actually supporting the water cycle. So the wise farmer would be the person who would take all of that into consideration when developing a property for agriculture. So the whole idea is like Cartier's philosophy of blending agricultural production and environmental conservation. For example, one of the things that they do is their Pasture Restoration project, where they come into an area where the pastures have been degraded, and we see a lot of degraded pastures around Belize, and they prescribe a series of trees and grasses that should be reinstalled into the landscape. Cattle need shade, and also they need micronutrients that many trees can provide through their seed pods and other sources. There are many trees that provide fodder for cattle during the dry season. But at the same time, there are also many grasses that are more nutritious than the weedy grasses that take over degraded fields. So they can go into an area and restore the productivity of the pasture, and they have two measurements of success. They're looking at the increase in the yield per acre for the livestock, and they're looking at the increase in biodiversity, overall biodiversity for the pasture. So it turns out that what's healthy for the ecosystem overall is healthy for the livestock as well, because both of those values go up in a successful restoration project. And they have those projects ongoing in Belize right now through the Belize Cattle Growers Association.
Okay, next question is, are the Mennonites' farming practices, especially water, monitored by any government agencies?
Not that I know of. And that's a group that we really need to have serious communication with. But I'll also say that I talk with a lot of the Mennonites that I know, some of the elders, some of the youth, and there is an awareness of the issues, and there is a concern. And many of the Mennonites have expressed an interest in modifying practices to become more sustainable, because they have a lot of investment on the ground and they want to hand that off to the next generation. And they want to give them farming systems that are still functioning. And the young farmers aren't running away from agriculture. They actually want to do a better job. They want to raise healthier food. We need to identify those individuals within the community who are thinking that way, and to support their efforts, and to encourage them to be the outreach to the rest of the community, because that's a very rich and powerful group, and we need them on our side. And I think together we can actually improve farming capacity.
Okay, next question. Pollution can be stopped, but most pollutants claim they can't afford the technology, especially with the pandemic. Any vision on financing technology for pollutants?
Well, Luis Garcia is among us, and he's one of the first ones to tell you that, nature has the solutions. Most of the solutions to pollution are microbial. And you can throw in a few select plants and other things that are great filtration and absorbing components, and create bioremediation systems that requires a little maybe concrete design, depending on how you're going to build those systems. And there's many ways. Luis is the expert, I'm not. But there are many ways of harnessing natural processes to take care of the pollution that we're creating. The next thing we need to do is to fully embrace recycling of everything. there's hardly anything that we produce that can't be reused if we approach it properly. And we need to insist that these things are part of our lifestyle. In some places of the world, there's no problem with recycling your household garbage. It's already set up. It's easy to do. In Belize, we have to make a dozen different trips to different areas to get rid of this or that, because we don't really have a centralized system yet. But there's efforts to set something up. But even everything from old car batteries, which of course are heavily base lead pollutants, to old cars themselves, to sewage. All of these things are actually resources that can be resold and refurbished into new products. We just need to stop throwing it away and start using it. We put a huge portion of our paycheck into making fecal material, and then we flush it into a river. And we don't really need to do that. We need to have a system set up so that we can compost and put that back onto the land and reuse those nutrients again to create the next crop. So I think it requires civil society to insist on these things. And there's a lot of government technicians ingrained within the system who want to do these things. And I think it's going to take a collaborative effort again to really pull that together. But that's the direction we need to move.
Okay. And that question was from Luis.
Oh,
as
All
is
right.
this one. Any nutrient recovery from waste to farmland initiatives?
Again, the only ones I know of, I'm not even sure are still happening, but that was where the farmer had a deal with in this case, it was the Belmont sewage treatment system to shovel up the material from the evaporation pans that went right back to the field. But I don't really know of any, at this point, any organized effort to do just that. But that's the kind of thing that we need. Other countries have been doing that for many years. Some have been doing it for centuries. But it's again, takes some planning and takes some dedication from general society who wants to see those things come to pass.
Okay. Do you know what programs are available for students at the University of Belize who are interested in water, agriculture, and the environment?
In the University of Belize, and it's been a few years since I've actually been involved with the University of Belize. In those days, you were retired at 55, but the natural resource management program still stands as probably the place because it's an applied program, and it has, since I've left, it's gotten a lot of highly trained Belizean faculty coming in from having pursued their degrees abroad and bringing those new ideas to Belize. So we have a body of people who know what needs to be done and can provide the young students with the backgrounds they need for doing the work at hand. And one of the things that they try to do is to promote actual involvement of youth as volunteers in programs around the country. But yes, there's a lot of potential there. There's a lot that needs to be done to improve the program, but at least we've been moving in the right direction.
Okay. Is there any payment for water extraction from the waterways for monitoring and rehabilitation or the watershed?
No, that's been something that's also discussed for years. Payment for environmental services, where the resource user pays something into the conservation of the resource, but that gets highly resisted because people don't want to have extra bills. But that's kind of short-term thinking, because if you're actually supporting the resource you're drawing from, you're helping to guarantee that resource is always going to be there to provide the services you need. And at the same time, there's a growing concern about the amount of water being abstracted from our waterways. More and more pumps going into the water all the time. And it's not just farmers, it's hoteliers, it's developers of all kinds, it's households that are drawing water from the river. And as I say, there's a limit to how much water you can abstract from a river before you start seeing ecological consequences. Monkey River has provided as an example of that. So much water extracted by particularly the banana growers, and secondarily the mangrove growers and others, that the river no longer delivered the load of sand to the seashore that balanced the amount of sand that was eroded away, because less and less water was arriving. And consequently, Monkey River Town, which became Monkey River Village, is now even smaller every day. And there's a lot of investment there to try to hold what's left and possibly build back. But to build back, you need water bringing sand from the source in the mountains to the coastal zone to replace longshore erosion. So it's understanding the holistic model of the water movement on the surface of the earth, and how we need to respect that, and how we need to take care of it. And there's a cost tag for doing that. We can't continue to use the resources for free. There needs to be some payment mechanism so the resource user understands the value of the resource they're using. If they don't, if it's free, it gets wasted. If there's a charge, it gets conserved.
Is there any study done which compares the flow of water with regards to extraction of water?
We've been trying to get that done for many years. The McCall River provides a prime test model for something like that, because the water definitely has value for several different reasons, from hydroelectric generation to agricultural use to tourism and so forth. And you can actually begin to work out the economics of that. But, and I've written proposals, other people have written proposals, but so far they've never been seriously considered, because I think people are, particularly those in power to make those decisions, are worried about how that would be looked at from the standpoint of voters.
Okay, and last question I see is, does anyone know what is the latest with the issue of the Maya forest and the purchasing of the land by the conservation group?
That's also been a hot issue. And I applaud the efforts. Dr. El McKay was helping to pull that deal together. That's ultimately a win-win for everybody. The Maya forest is actually the last remaining largest forest area outside of the Amazon. And the Amazon, of course, is also shrinking. But again, it goes back to the issue of conserving our water. Without the forest cover, we're not going to have the water that we require. And our populations in these areas have definitely grown. Our water demand has definitely grown. And our water provision system is shrinking. So anything we can do to conserve the forests that are providing the water that we use, we're all better off. And this initiative is, and I'm not sure of the details of the deal, so I can't really speak to that. But the way that many of these deals are struck, there's definitely benefits for the countries that are involved, for the people that are involved. And it's much like these carbon investors and their strategies for creating management, where every parcel they have is under management. That means that every parcel of land is providing jobs for people, and it's providing training, it's providing opportunities, as well as the conservation. And a lot of times these monies are coming from the outside. So we're looking at monies moving toward Belize rather than monies moving out of Belize as we buy so many imports. We need those systems where money is coming back into the country. And that's one way that we can generate income for Belize. And we're providing ecological services for the rest of the world by conserving our resources, because our resources play a part in the global system. So it's not charity, it's actually providing a service.
Okay, and here's a curiosity question. Does Belize water supply contain fluoride?
It contains traces of fluoride, not in the amount that would be found if fluoride were actually added to the water in a fluoridation program. At one point they were trying to add fluoride to our drinking water, but it was decided that enough fluoride was exposed to the general public through the products we used. Personally, I avoid fluoride, but I'd hate to see a fluoridation program start up. I think it should be your choice, and it should be involved in the products you purchase. But we do have background fluoride.
Okay, and I have a question. You said that there is capability for doing water tests here in the country, and is that available to individuals? And like, could someone take a supply, I mean, a sample of the river water to see what's in it and take it there to have it tested?
Yes, you can. There's a number of different ways. One way is probably the two ways that would be cost-effective ways would be through the DOE and through the Ministry of Health. The problem is, for you to take a water sample, you need to take it the right way so you're not contaminating that sample, and you need to take it in a sample container that's been specifically prepared through a washing technique that guarantees there's no contaminants involved. So if you're an individual that has access to those containers, and you do, you can actually get those from particularly the Ministry of Health, and you make arrangements, you can certainly do that and get results. As a matter of fact, the Ministry of Health appreciates being able to run good quality samples because it gives them information as well, information they wouldn't have otherwise. In the long term, the vision is that community groups, such as the ones we've been talking about, those organized groups that are focused on managing these natural resources, have within their ranks individuals that have been properly trained and outfitted with standard equipment to conduct water sampling. And if, for example, within, say, the Belize River watershed, we have, say, the FCD on one end, the Community Baboon Sanctuary on the other end, and maybe a couple of 3 different groups in between, who all had the capabilities of monitoring water quality stations, we would learn so much more about the long-term behavior of contaminants within the river and the behavior of the river than we would ever know through the system we have in place now, because government just doesn't have the people power to actually get out there and do the work that would be needed. At the same time, if you had a community group who had an expert among their ranks who could run water samples, they could also run water samples for community members. If you have a well, or if you are worried about your pipe water or other things, you would have somewhere to take that sample, or maybe even someone who would come and collect that sample and process it for you.
Okay. I don't see any other questions that anyone has submitted.
Well, I certainly appreciate the opportunity to chat. Sorry about my my rough edges when it comes to the technology. If I hadn't had folks here to take care of my my needs at the computer, I would have been stranded. So I'm glad we made it through without the net crashing, which is something I should applaud.
Yeah, something to anticipate at times.
Yes.
Well, I know we all appreciate your information and your sharing and taking the time to do your presentation and give us all this information. So just to conclude, our next general meeting actually is just July 17th from 3 to 5 via Zoom. You can send an email to proorganicbelize@gmail.com with any questions or about ProOrganic. And then there's our Facebook page, Facebook group, and then our website, proorganicbelize.org, has all kinds of information. And like I say, we do post the recordings of the speakers meetings. So Ed's presentation will be posted up there, I would say by the middle of the week, as well as the ones that we've done since January of this year. Our next speakers meeting will be August 7th, and our speaker will be Christopher Nesbit from the Maya Mountain Research Farm down in Toledo. So, oops, I see a chat. Just thanks very much for an enlightening session. Yes, I think everybody feels the same way. So thank you very much, Ed, for your time and all the information. We appreciate it.
Thank you for putting this together.
Very welcome.